District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Welcome to a special Friday edition of District of Conservation. I decided to time the release of this episode with tomorrow's commemoration of the Dingell-Johnson Act, or Sportfish Restoration Act of 1950, today, since most people will be busy on the weekend, but it's August 9th, the anniversary of this very seminal conservation law as it pertains to boating and fishing, excise taxes, and their connection. If you've been a longtime listener of the program, I've gone into detail about Pittman-Robertson and somewhat into Dingell-Johnson, but with this year being 75 years since the law was passed and signed into law by President Truman a long time ago, well before a lot of us were alive, I think it's important to analyze the significance of the law, what it does, and how it safeguards the future of fishing. Fishing isn't really as attacked as hunting and shooting sports, although there is wider acceptance of all these activities now, I think, with people wanting to be healthy, this MAHA movement, this return to your outdoor roots. We saw this post-COVID. But fishing hasn't really experienced, thankfully, a challenge. We've been a little miffed and afraid that participation would go down, but according to new Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation data, participation is at an all-time high. And believe it or not, as I've talked about before, it's not just fathers and men who are teaching their kids, boys and girls, how to fish. Women are actually leading the efforts to pass on these traditions too. So it's not just one gender that is really keen on fishing. It's also women too. So very, very exciting stuff happening in fishing. If you are a new listener and don't know kind of my backstory, how I got into the great outdoors, I want to give a little reminder. I can give a little reminder. Fishing was the gateway activity from which I learned how to do shooting sports and hunting. I learned how to fish from my father, like most people my age do. I'm a millennial. Like I said, women are now teaching their kids, these younger generation, how to fish. And old conventional wisdom goes that if you learn how to fish before age 12, you're 90 some odd percent to stick with it for the rest of your life. And I fall into that category very proudly. My father, being from Eastern Europe, he learned how to do it from some relatives who lived in then Soviet-occupied Belarus, and he did fishing in Soviet-occupied Lithuania. We do fishing today. He taught me how to fish since I was little. I was 8 years old, really got hooked by 12, and even now into my mid-30s, I'm still fishing with my dad. I'm fishing with friends. I'm fishing with many types of people for media trips, my own sole interests. I've done a lot of fishing far and wide. I have fished abroad. I fished in Lithuania last year. Didn't really catch anything impressive, but it was still fun to go fish in the ancestral homeland. I've fished a lot closer to home. I fished in Alaska. I've caught salmon. I've gone red drum fishing here in the lower Chesapeake Bay. So I am crazy about this stuff. You will hear me talk about this endlessly if you know me in real life or know me outside of the podcast and have met me. I am a fishing fanatic. I love it. And anytime you buy a license or boating equipment, fuel, etc., you are supporting conservation. So I'm going to explain what that mechanism is with excise taxes, if you need a reminder. So Dingell-Johnson, much like Pittman-Robertson, was passed at the height of kind of this unfettered, unregulated hunting and fishing going on at the turn of the 20th century. We saw species that are now widely accepted today, widely plentiful, almost on the brink of extinction, maybe threatened status, but very, very vulnerable and not at the health status we see today. So sportsmen and women in both the 1930s and 1950s recognized that we need to have some laws to safeguard our wildlife and our fisheries, because if we don't have some safeguards in place, we don't establish some seasons for hunting or for fishing, we could lose these very things that we appreciate, not only our quarry or fish that we want to pursue and eat with respect to Dingell-Johnson. Same with hunting. People were very concerned, and it's maybe out of self-interest, yes, but you're not constantly overfishing or overhunting if you are disciplined and you follow the laws. We do have people who fall into the category of poaching. I would say they're a outsized minority. Unfortunately, poaching still occurs even with these standards, but we have fewer incidences of market game hunting and fishing, and poaching because the penalties and the social ostracization and social media sleuthing that goes on, you can't get away with wildlife crimes these days, thankfully. And that's a good thing of social media. It's a positive quality. So we need these guardrails with fishing and hunting, highly regulated, but still possible to do. It's not the way that it was regulated, like behind the Iron Curtain, where only the privileged few could go fishing or hunting. But in the United States, we have this great model. Everyone knows this for hunting. I've talked long about this excessively this year so far, but I neglected to talk about Dingell-Johnson, I think, and this is the perfect occasion to do so. But these guardrails allow us to have plentiful trout, to have plentiful walleye, to have plentiful fish species in general to chase. We also see fish structure and fish habitat also preserved as well. So anytime you buy a license, boating equipment, fuel, you are continually and perpetually funding this cycle. And it's very similar to Pittman-Robertson, where the Department of Treasury collects the excise taxes. And I believe it is a 10% tax that is levied on fish equipment, tackle, pleasure boats, and a portion of gasoline fuel attributed to small engines and motorboats. And I'm reading this from the Fish and Wildlife Program, from Fish and Wildlife Service, website for the Sport Fish Restoration Program. And since its inception into law, over $12 billion have gone back to conservation, restoration of fish species and their habitats. It's not as much as shooting sports and hunting, but it's still a very significant amount. And you can't really say that non-sportsmen have contributed this amount of money. The proof is in the pudding. Sportsmen, anglers, gun owners have contributed the large share of conservation dollars through their expenditures in this system. So much like Pittman-Robertson, it's collected by Department of Treasury. Then the Department of Interior disperses these funds, like with Pittman-Robertson, based on the number of licenses and the territory of each individual state. So that is how these are apportioned. Now, a lot of people are like, these excise taxes, am I going to be penalized for paying this? These are user fees. This is not a punitive tax like income, a tariff, or something of that nature. And I want to remind you and point you back to the Tax Foundation calling this a good excise tax. And what does it mean? And why there's great trust with this, that people are confident and largely supportive of this because they see that it's not being wasted by the government. There's a lot of accountability. If there is any straying away from paying or appropriating and using these appropriated funds, to be stewarded correctly and well, people are very, very sensitive to that. Like you see in states like Colorado and some of these blue states that are misappropriating potentially these hunting and fishing dollars with these reimagining of their wildlife agencies. We do see that going on. So when funds are mismanaged, people are very sensitive to that and they call that out and they want greater accountability of proper usage of both Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson. But I want to point you to the fact of what an excise tax is. So it's a 10% value relating to fishing gear as it relates to Dingell-Johnson collected by the manufacturer. And the Tax Foundation explains that the excise tax on fishing gear was established by Dingell-Johnson in 1950. The rate is 10% of value and also collected at the manufacturer level. While a specific flat rate excise tax would improve the design, the rates are low enough to avoid interfering with consumer choice. That is why, through its allocation with the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Fund, apportioned to all states based on land area and hunting and fishing licenses, as I talked about before. Recreational boaters also pay into the fund through fuel taxes on motorboats and small engines. By design, the tax works as a user fee for hunters and fishers, where purchases of equipment act as a proxy for the buyer's consumption of recreational outdoor activities. And because it respects the benefit principle so well, the tax enjoys general support among America's sporting and outdoor community. The excise tax on hunting and fishing equipment can teach us some lessons about well-designed excise taxes. If you want to dive deep into this about the disbursement and allotment, the tax rates, why it's not punitive, why it's very popular, you see polling on both Dingell-Johnson and Pittman-Robertson. It's very popular, and any attempts to curtail this type of funding is met with a lot of opposition. So if you are fishing and boating, you have this law to thank for the opportunities, the access, the species that you pursue, the areas that you are able to access. It really is such a joy and a privilege to have this in this country. No other country, granted, countries abroad do have opportunities to fish, but it's so scarce and so difficult to do because they don't have these conservation laws in the books like we do, based off of this North American model of wildlife conservation that applies to both hunting and also fishing. But we have this great opportunity to fish, hunt, enjoy shooting sports in this country. And laws like this remind our people, remind the American public that when you're responsible, when there is a funding mechanism in place, you are better attuned to these resources. You will not engage in poaching. You have a greater appreciation for the fish species and the habitats that you access, the areas that you go to. You get to not only chase after and pursue fish and perhaps the other wildlife in the process, but you get to enjoy beautiful scenery. This is all encompassing. This is very wonderful. This is not a partisan issue. This is enjoyed and supported by both members of Republican Party, Democrat Party, spans all partisan inclinations and ideologies. And we want to keep and sustain this. So continue to buy fishing licenses, continue to buy boating equipment, motor fuel, etc. We want these traditions to continue. And through a vehicle like Dingell-Johnson, it does. Let's keep this funding source alive and in perpetuity. I hope you've been taking this summer to go on the water, to get outdoors. Outside of my walleye fishing trip at Poma that I had a few months ago, I have neglected and been very negligent about getting my fishing quota in. However, I will make up for it in the fall time. And I am going to Europe. I will have a report from Europe. I'm going to 4 different countries that I've never traversed. I will get some outdoor activities under the books. Sadly, no fishing. I'm going to the birthplace of modern day fly fishing, and I can't do fly fishing there, but it's okay because I might get to do some wildlife viewing of fallow and roe deer. We'll see what happens there. And I'll get to go to some national parks and wildlife areas in some of these countries I am traversing for the first time. So in lieu of fishing, I will get my outdoor quota fulfilled when I go abroad in a few weeks. I think it's coming up on 2 weeks from today. Gosh, as I record. So Europe is on the horizon. I will have a couple more episodes before I head on vacation. And then we're going to kick off season 8 of the podcast after Labor Day. September 8th is when we're going to kick off season 8 of District of Conservation. Can you believe it's been 7 years since I launched the show? I'm still in disbelief. I can't believe we're keeping this going. Actually, I can believe it because there is a need to do this. But thank you so much for everyone who has been here from the get-go, even new adopters of the show. However you found District of Conservation, through word of mouth, through SEO, through me, whatever channel you have found the program, I really appreciate you being here. And if you can, please share the good word. Suggest some guests for me because we have lots of opportunities to engage different stakeholders. We're in a very interesting environment. We have an administration that is favorable to sport fishing and hunting opportunities now, and we can hold them accountable when they stray off. But we have greater accountability and I would say better attuned people to our interests in this administration compared to the Biden-Harris administration. So get your fish on. I hope you have a great rest of the summer. And we'll have, like I said, a couple more episodes before we take a slight break to reel in for season 8 of the program. But I hope you get a chance to research and study Dingell-Johnson more because it is a very underappreciated law. And it doesn't infringe on our rights. It doesn't impose any burdens on us, but it's a good standard to have of the function of the government. Doing this is perfectly within their interests. If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.